So this is a recap of the presentation I gave to the Sitecore New England User Group on August 27th in 2014. So my presentation title is Sitecore Integrating Machine Learning. So first question, what is machine learning? So machine learning is a field of study that gives computers the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. Well, the man who is quoted as saying this is Arthur Samuel in the year in which he said it was 1959. I didn't even realize it was this old, so it's not new, it's just new to me. Okay, what is machine learning and how does machine learning work? What's behind it? Well, so there's two parts really. There's random chance, which creates variability and variation, and then there's probability. And the probability drives the randomness into a productive direction. So if anyone's familiar with how the MIT team played blackjack to win, the mechanics are similar. And what they're doing is trying to count cards, and over time, given a certain point range that you're in, you can determine what you should do. And this chart is telling you that. And what it does is, you're not going to win every hand, but the probability is high that you'll win more than you'll lose. So that's kind of the gist. So the first thing we're going to try to use it with is personalization. And personalization is the most visual thing, so I thought it might be good to start there. So if you're going to jump into trying to do a personalization, the process somewhat looks like this. You're going to first look into your analytics, and from there you're going to try to determine your demographics and build personas. With that, then you're going to be able to try to define your inbound channels and set goals. Then you try to define your patterns so that as people are fulfilling goals, they're getting funneled into personas. And then you're going to then create your content. And with that content, you can set the data source on the rendering using the rules engine. Now this, I feel, might be a little too technical of a series of steps for marketers and content managers. So, not to knock them. So marketers are good at what they do. They're super marketers, and they create good content and make awareness for their brands. But let's take into consideration something happens. Let's say a law changes, or a competitor goes out of business, and all of a sudden your website starts getting new traffic. Now, every day that you have to go back and try to rewalk those steps of looking at your analytics and building your personas and demographics, you're missing opportunities, and you don't want to leave that up to someone having to walk through that process over and over again. They may not even know that they need to. There are these times where, having an algorithm paying attention to doing this automatically would make more sense. So, okay, what would that look like? So the new process for a content editor instead would be to creating content, tagging that content, building your navigation and tagging your navigation that matches. So in the case where you would have, like Amazon, they would have content categories, top-level categories such as electronics, home goods, food, things like that. And under electronics, electronics would be a tag. You could create content for all types of phones or televisions or whatever. So as you clicked on electronics, it would start tracking clicks that says, the system will start tracking clicks and say, this is what they're clicking on. You should show them more of this. And the algorithm will start incorporating that information. But for a content editor, all they're responsible for is just creating content, navigation, and tagging them similarly. And that is a much less technical task, and I feel like it might be more within their, core strength. So what would it look like? So if I have a demo website that uses this algorithm to give you a proof of concept of how this would work. So I'll jump to that. Now, like I said, when you click on certain navigation elements or any of these content here, it's going to register a click. Now, my top-level navigation is colors. I thought it might be helpful just to stay with visual, plain visuals. And every time you click on one of these navigation, it's going to store a click value of 1 for that tag, that color. And over time, what you'll see is that it'll start to show you content in a sense relative to the amount of what you've been clicking on. But first, let's say you're a new user. What's going to happen when you come to a site that's got content being driven by an algorithm? Well, what they're going to see is just random content. And there isn't going to be any kind of a pattern here. It's kind of a free-for-all. It's a nice mix. Now let's just say I decided to choose something and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go with green. It's a nice color. Oh, there's 2. Oh, there's 4. Well, that's interesting. Oh, there's 5. So already it's starting to pick it up pretty quick. Oh, there's 7. Well, that's interesting, you know. So if I hit this, I just keep refreshing. Okay, well, it seems to be staying there. That's interesting. And, you know, it's already showing me a good percentage of what I'm looking at. 7 out of 8 is just what I've been clicking. So that's good. Okay, it's definitely seems like there is a pattern here. Now let's just say I was going to, you know, all of a sudden change my mind and I wanted to click in a new category. Well, what's going to happen? And what do we think is going to happen? Well, you'd think that first purple will start to show up a little, and then more and more as I click more. And then as I've clicked more than green, more times than I've clicked green, it should show me more purple than green. So let's see if that's what happens. Okay, so I've clicked maybe 2 or 3 times and it's already starting to show me 1 purple. That's good. And it is starting to vary. And you can see it, we'll go back and forth. Okay, now it's showing me 2 purple and less green, but still a lot. Continuously it is 6 out of 8 is exactly what I've clicked on. That's still a high percentage, even though I'm still getting some randomness. It's still really giving me what I want, you know, and eventually it will start giving me more purple, more green, and you can see it kind of like flipping around, trying new combinations. It's definitely taking on an organic process. And even here, where it's down to 5 out of 8, it is still now more purple than green. And the more I click, you're going to see, you know, it'll start to dominate, and it will eventually turn over into, you know, a more, like right now. Okay, we got 3 green, we've got 4 purple, because I've been clicking it more, and we're still 7 out of 8 placeholders are now purple and green. So, you know, I keep refreshing, it's going to stay there. All right, it's kind of like a, you know, it's kind of settled. This is a good match. So let's say I pick something that I'm not even seeing over here. Let me pick, you know, black and see how many times it takes me to click black to get mostly black. You know, because we want to show that this is actually changing with the behavior of the user. So okay, I'm starting to get black and purple, which are the last 2 things that I've been clicking. 2, now 1, 2, and you can see that this is already starting to drift. It's following me, you know, like The Boy and His Dog, if anybody has ever seen that movie. You know, and eventually this will win out as this becomes more clicked on than purple. So this is the general idea of what's going on behind the algorithm. It is mixing and it is matching combinations of these strings to try to get you a population that, you know, provides what you're looking for. So I have a population manager, and what this does is it gives me a diagnostic tool to kind of see what's going on and work on it, because it's not clear exactly from what you're seeing what is going on. But what is going on is that you have a handful of numbers behind the scenes that are governing your population of living entities. And here you can see that this is, as I can push this through, this is what I'm seeing basically on the front end. And here are my click values that are being stored. These are slightly off because they're being curved down, and the ones on the front end aren't, but this is the proportion is correct. So the population that it's creating is actually a series of lists of tags, and these lists of tags are my solutions. So the length of this is the same number as the number of placeholders there are to fill. So what it's going to do is, it's going to take the first one, say black, put black tag there, purple tag in the second one, purple in the third, black in the third, purple, and so on. And this is how I'm retrieving a solution from this algorithm. And at the end here, you can see this number. This is scoring. This is a fitness value. The most fit are scored highly. You can see how much more higher this is than this, and that's the reason why it is at the top, because it is so much higher. And it is within a range. It'll pick about within 90% of the top value. It'll pick one in there. But this is the population here, and you can see that it's basically just a small set of strings of tags. Okay, back to the slideshow, because there is more here. So the way I wanted to go back, when I learned this algorithm, I actually discovered it through a conversation, and I looked it up and I found a working Hello World algorithm, and I used that algorithm to just take it apart and understand the mechanics. And then after I did, I wanted to understand how they went and adapted a biological process to the algorithm so that I could see if I could add anything and make it, better. And I did, and I added on. I tried to make it more accurate to the actual biological processes. So what I've discovered when I went and did my research is that the DNA really only has 4 nucleotides, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And so really it's almost like a base 4-digit system. And with that, the first, whenever it's building a sequence, it uses 3 essentially bits to make a marker. And the first here, and the codon 1 and codon 7 are starter and ender markers, and it knows how to start and end a process or a gene. And so the total combination of what a codon can be is 4 to the 3rd, and it's 64 different things that codon can be. There's 64 amino acids. And what I think that, if I remember my hardware correctly in my machine code, this means that this is a 64-bit serialized data, as far as I can tell, and anyone can correct me if you'd like to. So I think that that's what DNA is, and with that, the amino acids being sort of a function within that. So now then becomes the challenge of trying to figure out what is machine versus what is algorithm. And then I believe what I wanted to do is take that point and start there. So the codons really kind of represent a function or property in the gene, which makes up the next larger object. You could think of as an entity. It is a protein, which is a functioning object. So at that point, I decided that mimicking the biological machinery was where we would start. And the gene is the base class, the base of the class library for the genetic algorithm. Okay. So the GA.Nucleus, which is the core library, has a population, which is a population of the solutions, the karyotypes in the biological definition, A karyotype is a definition of an entity. It's not an entity like a physical incantation, but it's the definition. So it has a gender and 2 haploids. The gender is important later because you don't want something mating with itself. You want it mixing. And that provides that. Having 2 haploids is used. 2 haploids are, a haploid is a set of chromosomes. The human genome has 23, I don't know whatever other animals have, but you have 2 sets of them. One is from your father, one is from your mother. And your visual, you create a phenotype to display kind of like a combination of the 2. So you end up showing half of your DNA. The other half is hidden. And this is how it's structured. So chromosomes, I basically made a haploid a dictionary of chromosomes. A chromosome is a list, C# list of genes. And a gene only has an ID and a dominance. The ID is to, obviously, to identify it, and the dominance is to help when you're developing your phenotype for an individual entity. The phenotype is used to measure fitness. It is used to compare one to another. Because you have 2, you're neither one, your mother, or your father. You're a mix. That mix is represented by a property in there called the phenotype. And the phenotype is, when the phenotype is crunched down for its fitness, it is comparing all the genes and their dominance so that it knows if 2 things are dominant. It's a 50-50 chance if they're both the same, but if one is dominant, one is recessive, then dominant will show. I'll get into that. I have actually a visual for that too. The genotype, which isn't shown on here, the genotype is kind of like all the DNA that can make up somebody. The haploids only contain a subset of that genotype, but it's a definition to create an entity. So you want to tell it which chromosomes it should have, how long each chromosome should be, and what to use to make up the genes. And that is what the genotype is used for. It's used in the initiation. And the random utility is used all over the place. It's used to create the variation. So the genetic algorithm Lifecycle starts where you create a new population. You sort and select your karyotypes, so you pick your most fit, and that's what we're choosing here to display. And then when it's finished, it starts this cycle, and it does a mate and mutate, which is the evolution cycle. Once it's mated and mutated, it comes back, it sorts and it selects again, and then you have a new selection. This process of evolution takes place on every click. So when you click, it goes and evolves. It goes and it stores information, it goes and evolves, and it sends you back a result. Mating in and of itself now is a process, and mating only uses a subset of the population. So there are what is known as elites. Elites is a percentage of your population that doesn't get removed during the evolutionary process. The reason is that when you sort and you have the most fit set, it's 10%, so it's the top, out of 10 it would be the top 1. The top 1 is the best. Now you don't want to go worse. You want your populations to continue to do better over time. So you keep one that is your best the same, and the rest will mix and replace themselves with their children. And if their children turn out worse than the best, they'll stay below them in that sort order, and your population's fitness will stay the same. But if the mixes combine and they turn into a better match, they will sort higher than the highest and push them out of the elites, and your highest will now be better. So it'll either stay the same fitness or improve in its fitness, but it will never get worse. So the proletariat, who I named after it seemed fitting since they do the work, the proletariat are then only a subset of the proletariat actually do mating. Now, we use the crossover ratio, and that is the percentage of your proletariat that gets mated. What happens is it says, takes the first, as it's looping through, it takes the first karyotype in the proletariat, and it says, give me a random from 0 to 1, and if that value is less than the crossover ratio is 0.8. So it's a high probability that it will happen, an 80% chance. Then take that parent and mate, and then grab a second parent randomly from the entire list, elites included, and loop through a random tournament selection. Now this is a value also set in the config, and you're basically dating. You're picking a random parent, and then you're trying to pick another random parent that's better a certain number of times. If you don't find one, you stick with the best one you've got, and then you mate, and then the child replaces the first parent. And that's the turnover right there. So that starts churning the pot. Once you have two mates and you're ready to mate, there is a process known as meiosis, which is the creation of the seed for the new child. So each entity will do this, but this is how one would do it. So it takes its mother's and father's haploids, and it loops through each chromosome, and then it goes down the list of each gene, and it says, it's a 50-50 chance that the seed will have one or the other chromosome. So it's a good random mix all the way through. So you get a new mix from your mom, a new mix from your father, and then you take that, and that's your new entity. That's your new karyotype. So once you have a new entity, then you have to measure the phenotype. So it takes the new mix, mom's, dad's mix, and it goes down, loops through the chromosomes, loops through the genes, and then it says, if these two are dominant, then it's a 50-50 chance which one it will pick. If they're both recessive, it's the same thing, 50-50. But if one is dominant and one is recessive, then it will use the dominant. Once the phenotype is set, then the fitness can be measured, and the list can be sorted. Mutating is also part of this, and this is so that it also creates a certain level of variability. You don't necessarily want a high mutation rate because it will cause instability, but it does still, create some variation. And sometimes when you don't want something to get stuck, that variation is good. So again, here we have the mostly the top, least fit, and it's taking the random selection from proletariat, and it does the same process where it says, for pick a random number from 0 to 1, if that number is less than the mutation ratio, which is 0.1, so it's a low probability, then switch a single gene, and on it goes. This happens at the same time during, mating, so they're both occurring at the same time. So the algorithm, the way I've tied this algorithm to Sitecore is through this process. So the user, when the user clicks, the click is fired off to a web service, and it stores a single value, a 1 value for the tag that you've clicked on. And then the page reloads, and then during that process, the pipeline event gets run pretty much at the end of an HTTP request, and it says it grabs all the renderings on a page, and it checks for which ones have the GA data source set. It takes the count, the number of those, in my case it was 8, and it sends that to the algorithm, and then it passes in the tags that it needs to know what to make its genome with. So it has the length of a chromosome and what to make it up of. So then it does its thing, creates its population, sorts it, filters it, sends it back, and then you use that to set the data source. So in this one case, I set one to blue, in one case, I set it to red. Then the page is sent back to the user. So when it comes to instantiating this algorithm, the first step is to define your genome. This is done in the GA.SC pipelines insert renderings processor set GA data source class. So this is the pipeline class that does it. The first thing it does is it creates a genotype list. It creates a genotype object for page content. So it has one chromosome called page content, and then it sets the length to 8, which is what I had, and then it populates that. It creates a tag gene object for every tag in the folder that I have, and it sets the ID to that name of that tag. Now that it has the genotype, so it knows the length of the chromosome and what to make up of it, it then takes that, it takes config values in step 2, and it feeds that into the population. The population then gives you your fit karyotype, it then, which has a phenotype, which has the page content chromosome, and then it provides you the list of tags that you can use to set the data sources with. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the tags, I'm querying for content in a folder whose tag is that, and anything that gets returned, I'll just set that. I only have one object at this point, but you could have some kind of at that point, some control over weighting and putting, certain content above others, or however you want to handle it. So odds and ends. So the odds of something happening and the ends of the endpoints of the algorithm, or the solutions. So given, let's say you have a genome that only has 2 tags, or a genotype that only has 2 tags with a length of 2. And then you're going to click blue 1 time. So your population, what your population is going to look like is this: blue blue, blue red, red blue, and red red. These are your only combinations. And the way it's going to measure the fitness is to say blue was clicked once and blue was once, so 1 and 1 is 2. Blue and red, well, blue only has 1 value, so its value is 1. Red and blue, same thing. Red and red is 0, since so red wasn't clicked at all. Now, here in this case, blue is only 1/4 of the solutions that it's available. But given a long enough gene with enough tags, the probability of getting that blue, or that perfect solution is immediately very low, because you have a population of 100 or 300 or something, but the number of combinations is humongous, and so you're only getting a small set of that. And as you churn over your population, you will eventually maybe get there, but it will take a while. So the likelihood of you hitting that endpoint, blue or red or that one perfect solution, because no matter what you click, whatever the highest thing that is you've clicked, the perfect solution is one with only that. So you should be aware that will occur, and trying to create churn and prolong that from happening is a valuable thing. Okay, so fitness. Now that we kind of understand how fitness adds up, let's take an example given a chromosome length 2 with 4 colors. Right? I don't have all the permutations, I just have a handful. But basically, this is how you would score it. Again, red was clicked twice, red would be 4. Blue would be 16. Blue red would be 10, because 2 and 8. Blue orange would be 17, and orange would be 18, because 9 and 9 is 18. So this is what it's kind of going to look like over time, is that these tags will have a certain value of clicking, and this is how you would measure the fitness. The fitness ratio, now let's assume in this case we have a perfect case, which is orange, or blue, which I changed it and didn't change that. But orange is going to give you 18. That's your top value. But you don't necessarily want the top value. You still want kind of a mix. In some cases, maybe you don't. You can set it to 100% or something, but your fitness ratio to 100%. But blue-orange is 17. 17 is about 94% of 18, but it's above 90%. My fitness ratio is 90%. So 17 is an acceptable value. So it will switch between these two, randomly picking one or the other, because it's within the ratio. It locks in. It discourages or lock in. It will encourage variety. So fitness threshold was another thing that I added in here. And the point behind this was that there was an article written by Andrew Blackmore from Valier about tapering the personalization values over time to 0. Because if you think about something you've been clicking on for like years, all those things in the past might not necessarily be relevant anymore. Your personality changed over time. The things that you're clicking now are more relevant than what you clicked a year ago. So to kind of set the value to have a half-life is what he was doing. He tapered the value of a click on a curve. So I like that idea. I took it and I incorporated it into this. So that, let's say you clicked on something one time, and I have a very low fitness threshold. That click value will quickly rise to that threshold, and it will kick in the algorithm. If you don't click on anything, the algorithm isn't going to click in, and it's just going to randomly give you a result. It doesn't care. But once you hit a fitness threshold, it does care, and then it starts giving you values that it thinks are the best for what you're doing. And this makes sense because you want it to only react to values once you've been doing something long enough for them to make a value stick around. I didn't put mine on a curve to 0 because I thought even if something was a year old, if you clicked it enough times, there's probably some value to it. You'd have to figure out what your fitness threshold is and let that be, or your minimum value on that curve. And those are all values you can modify. But over time, it comes to this minimum value in the first click. And then the second time you click, you see it's the full value of the click plus that minimum value. And that's starting to grow over time, and eventually it will stay over the fitness threshold. Okay. Oops. So the modifier, again, that I was using, I actually went and I found this online calculator, and then there's the article by Andrew Blackmore, and here's the calculator I used to build my function. So if you paste this value at the bottom here in where this sine wave is, and then hit enter and hit all, and it'll populate these values you can tinker with. This thing is how I was able to kind of understand it and work with the function, and that is implemented in the modifier that does the curving. I disabled it for this because it is actually fairly computationally intensive, and the timeline that we're looking at is in a matter of a minute, so it's not going to really, half-life isn't going to make that much sense, but it will slow it down. It is, I think, a linear slowdown, but measuring curves is just a computationally expensive thing to do, so it might have to be either scrapped or reworked or moved to a batch server or something. So keep that in mind, but it is a concept that I thought that was worth mentioning. So the supporting libraries, the rest of the libraries that I used, so there's the Nucleus, which is it's the core algorithm. There's GA.SE, which implements the algorithm by defining what the genes are, the fitness, providing population tools like the manager, which creates the population and puts it in session and keeps retrieving it, and in the web service class. The GA.SE UI also provides the front-end web service endpoint and the diagnostic tool, which is the back end that I showed you. The GA.SE UI sample site really it doesn't have it, it's actually piggybacking, but that's where you would set, it represents your site, and it would be where you would create the GA config settings and then build a click event processor. In my case, I'm using a jQuery, just a make a quick post to a web service. So what are the other uses for this algorithm? What can we do with it? Because, you know, I like the idea of personalization, and I thought it would just be, you know, something that everybody could kind of, you know, picture and make sense for. But there are a lot of other uses for it. So the genetic algorithm is a big data search. Now, if you think of what we're searching in this case, the solution for what a person is doing. Now, there's a solution is what the data sources are for all the renderings, and what a good solution is for an individual changes over time. So you're really trying to hit a moving target in a lot of combinations of what any individual could want. So that is the big data, and yet that's what you're searching. But there are other things where this could be applied. I'm not sure exactly what, but come on if you've got problems, and see if this can't, you know, work for you. So the other thing that I could think of is device detection. Now, as the list of devices, hardware devices, grows that people are going to be using, you know, you can manually keep track of this list, or you can have this algorithm automatically do it. And the way I think this would work would be you would have a growing dictionary of all your hardware devices, and as a new one came on, it would just create a new entry, and within that entry you would have your population storage or something like that. And what it would do is basically you measure your fitness based on page load times. So if the Sitecore device that you're presenting for a hardware device is slow, then you know it will know to change it and try to find one that has a faster load time. And once it does, it will stick with that. So any given device, you know, could be getting the one or the other, you know, something that's loading quickly for it. And you might have to tweak it or tinker it so that, you know, prefers desktop if it's slow, if it's fast enough, or, you know, if it's getting slow, then use the other one. But that's generally how it would work. Prefetching caching, so the same idea. The genetic algorithm is also very good at allocating limited resources. And if you have a limit on your memory that you're trying to use to cache a site, or if you're doing prefetch, which is trying to cache things before user starts using Sitecore, then you're going to, you know, having an algorithm there which is kind of keeping track of what's been being used and trying to use that to determine which solution, which you know, resource allocation is best. And it, you know, you give it a way to measure it, and it will pick for you and find a good one. And over time, it will get better. So that is, I think that's a good use for it too. Another thing, and this is really nebulous, and I don't necessarily know at all how this would work, but the concept around security. Now, if the user, right now we're using probably a lot of CAPTCHA or other, you know, form things to prevent, you know, honeypots and stuff. And one thing I think that you could do is create a set of security that could determine behaviors that, or if you were to tell it what kind of behaviors are probably not normal uses, it would be able to adapt and say, as you are getting abusive, it would lock you out. Either just stop allowing you to use forms or just 400 you until you went away. Something like that. Anyway, so that's what I've come to thinking. There's one last thing that I do want to say before kind of letting this go, and that this is just a prototype. This is just a proof of concept. Like, I literally got it off the ground in a month and a half. It's standing, and I could show it to you, but there are a lot of things that are not permanent. So one thing is that this isn't tied to analytics. I'm only storing those engagement values and the population data in session. But right now, this would only work for, you know, a limited time. If somebody came to the site and left and came back tomorrow, you know, everything would be wiped out. So there's a long-term storage that needs to be worked out. Right now, it's not using content search; it's just using a Sitecore query. So I wanted to be able to just have people create content in buckets and tag it, and then just use a content search. But it's not doing that yet. That's probably where I'm going to go with it, though. The manager UI is built to match the sample set. The number of placeholders that it's showing is the same exact number as the sample site. It's not a utility that can be used for any site or wherever solution. So be aware of that too. Modifier, like I mentioned earlier, is computationally intensive, and it was disabled for this, but it as a concept is a good idea. Another possible solution is that you would just say after a certain date you don't even count those values or something like that. That would be similar to running them to 0. And then you have the possibility that this could be even more complex. So you can add multiple chromosomes. I only added 1 for a single page content, but you could have maybe left column, right column. Maybe it's add text versus informational text. Maybe one is content and one is forms. I don't know. This is the kind of thing that I built it to support it because it mimics life, and life, as far as I can tell, is pretty complicated. I want this to be able to have that ability to be complicated as well. I don't know necessarily what's going to happen when you try to do those kinds of things, but I think that there is some value there, and any experimentation is more than welcome. So that's kind of where this is at. And that was pretty much the end of my presentation. If anybody's going to be at Symposium this year, 2014, please come talk to me, ask me any questions you want. Yeah, all right. So thank you if you made it this far in the video, and good night.